Yeah, this is good. This is
I plan to actually plug this computer over there.
okay. Do you want me to be there? I mean, I kind of like
No,
this
that's
because you
fine.
see the,
Yeah.
but my head's in the way of the art, so.
Yeah. I mean, Em and I can sit.
This, okay, here we go. So Tina, take it away. You can tell them who you are and what your
Okay.
experience is, but a lot of us have already met you in the parking lot of the library, getting
That's
wine
right.
from you.
Oh,
when
she's
you're
gonna
drunk. Yeah, thank you.
In another venue, that wouldn't sound very good.
I know.
Disregard for good. So first off, Marianne, thank you so much for having me back. And for those of you who don't know me, please allow me to introduce myself. Tina Kanter is my name. I'm a certified sommelier from Mansfield. I own a local small business. Basically, I focus on wine. I predominantly work with private clients doing wine tastings and selection for special occasions. I do events live and virtually, both from small tastings up to large corporate gatherings. I manage private collections for investments, and I work with restaurants on wine lists and seasonal offerings. Obviously now there's not much to do with restaurants, but hopefully in the spring and summer that will come back as well. But basically I just love wine and talking about wine and teaching wine. So that's who I am. So enough about me. Let's get to why you guys are actually here, and that is sparkling wine. And I know I heard at least in the last 2 days, 3 people say that sparkling is not for them. And I will not hold that against you, but I will work tirelessly to change your mind because I am very passionate about sparkling wine. I love it. So let's start there. I want to say that this is a conversation. It's not meant to be a monologue. I am not a professor. I am someone who loves to talk about wine. There'll be lots of time for questions in the end, but if you have something in the meantime, please, I want to have a conversation. So there's truly a lot to talk about when it comes to sparkling wine. And it can be pretty daunting because there's a lot to learn too, but it can be a really fun adventure if you're ready to explore. Today, we're actually just going to be able to scratch the surface so you can understand the basics and open your eyes to some of the incredible variety that's out there and how you can find a bottle that's perfect for your taste. First important thing we're going to address today, and I'm going to say this very passionately, not all sparkling wine is champagne. If you walk away from this conversation with one piece of knowledge, that's the most important. Only sparkling wine made in the traditional method from the Champagne region is allowed to be called champagne. There's a ton of diversity out there and at virtually every price point. So we'll dig into what your choices are, why they differ, and what you may enjoy most. Sparkling wine is arguably the most technical wine in the world. And what makes the stuff so technical is that it undergoes not just one fermentation process to make alcohol, but a second fermentation process to make the bubbles. Throughout the entire winemaking process, the winemaker has a lot of choices that he or she can make, which will greatly affect the way the final wine tastes and feels. Sparkling wine can come from a multitude of regions, be made in a huge variety of ways, from virtually any grape varietal, and have differing levels of sweetness. So let's start breaking that down and make it a little bit easier. The most common styles of sparkling wine are Prosecco, Cava, Cremant, Sect, Francia Corta or Trento, Pet Nat, which I guess isn't that common, but I love it, so I'm making it common. American Sparkling, Cap Classique, and Champagne, including vintage and grower champagne. Those are just the most common. There are others as well. Let's talk about how sparkling wine is actually made. There are 6 major methods by which sparkling wine is produced. each resulting in a different carbonation level and ultimately a different style of bubbly. We'll discuss all the styles briefly, but there's two worth really paying attention to, and that's the traditional method used in Champagne and the tank or Charmat method used for Prosecco. But the different styles or the different methods are traditional and tank, as I just mentioned, transfer, ancestral, continuous, and carbonation. The traditional method also is known as the méthode champenoise or méthode traditionnelle, méthode cap classique, método classico, and others. But those are the most common. Any bottle that's made in this traditional method will state it on the bottle in some fashion. It is very important to the way that sparkling is made, that if it is made in that style, it will say it. If it is not made in that style, it will not say it. It may not say anything else, but it will not say that. It's arguably also appreciated most, this method, for sparkling wine because it produces the highest quality sparkling, also the most costly based on the production. We'll go through that a little bit. The most important facet of this traditional method is that the transformation from a still wine to a sparkling wine occurs entirely inside the bottle. So I know if you know me well and you've been to my classes before, I talk a lot about how the wine is living in the bottle. It is never more real than that than with sparkling wine. So this one I'll break down a little bit how it's made because I find it fascinating. And then we'll breeze through some of the less common styles. But the way to make a traditional or a champagne method sparkling is you start with a base wine. So the grapes are picked. They're usually picked a little bit young to preserve the acidity, and then they're fermented into a dry wine. And dry means the sugar has been used up. So there's no more sugar. Sugar has turned into alcohol. The winemaker then takes the various base wines. So champagne is usually, or champagne method is usually a blend of grapes. Each grape varietal is fermented into its own wine, its own base wine. The winemaker then takes those wines, base wines, and blends them together into what the French call a cuvée. That is a final wine blend that's going to create the sparkling. Next is a tirage. And that's when yeast and sugars are added to the cuvée. Sometimes it's not sugars added. Sometimes there's enough sugar in the sparkling, so they just add yeast. But that's added to the bottle. So it's added to the base wine to start the second fermentation, and then it's bottled right away. So the second fermentation happens entirely in the bottle. And a crown cap, or what is often like a bottle cap, like you see in a beer bottle, is put on top. That second fermentation happens inside the bottle, and it will increase up to another 1.5% of alcohol. And during that process, CO2 is created. CO2 is what causes the bubbles, and they're trapped inside the bottle, carbonating the wine. The yeast then dies in a process called autolysis and remain in the bottle. The wine's then aged on their lees. Lees is what the dead yeast cells are called, for a period of time. And that develops the texture of the wine. Champagne requires a minimum of 15 months aging, 36 months for a vintage champagne. Cava and other méthode classique or méthode traditionnelle are about 9 months. And then Grand Reserva Cavas are 30 months aged in the bottle. Next is riddling. And that's a clarification process that occurs when the bottle is upside down and the dead yeast is collected into the set of the neck. And it's actually very beautiful if you get to see it, where they turn the bottles by hand. Each bottle is turned by hand. Next step is disgorging, which is very interesting in my opinion. The bottles are placed upside down in freezing liquid, which causes the yeast bits in the neck to freeze. And then they pull the crown cap off, and the sediment and just shoots up. And then they flip the bottle over very quickly. And then they actually put a dosage, which is a mixture of the must, grape must, back in to fill up that spot. So it's either grape must or it's more of the already created champagne. They fill it back into the bottle in that space that was left when the disgorging happened, because one, who's going to buy a partially full bottle of champagne? And two, if you don't fill that space, oxygen fills that space. And oxygen, as you know, oxidizes wine and reduces the quality of the wine. So there's that dosage, then it's corked, it's wire wrapped and sealed. So that is a pretty extensive process to make a champagne method. That's why these bottles cost so much. The next method is called the tank method, or Charmat. And examples of sparkling wines made in this method are Prosecco and Lambrusco. The major difference between tank method and the traditional method is that that second fermentation happens in a tank rather than in the bottle. So the base wines are put together in a tank.
Tina.
Tina, we muted you by accident.
Ah, got
There
it.
you go.
Sorry, Tina.
That's
I got
okay.
people over the lip.
You tired of my voice already?
Oh, no.
No, no.
So I'm not sure where I was.
I heard distractions in your talking, so I muted everybody, but I muted you. So you were
Okay.
talking about after you leave that space in the wine and
Ah,
it's filled with must, and then you were talking. Sorry.
got it. So
Oh,
I
wait.
think I got to
Got on to something else.
We got to tank method.
Tank. Yes, 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 yes.
Okay, good. So we talked about Prosecco made in a tank.
No,
Yes.
No.
No. Okay. So the tank method is also known as Charmat method. Prosecco and Lambrusco are made in that way. And the major difference is the tank method is that the second fermentation happens in the tank, not in the bottle. The dry wine is in the tank. Then there is sugar added and yeast added to the tank. The second fermentation happens there. The wine then becomes clarified or filtered, and then it's bottled. So a Prosecco basically is bottled right out of the tank. This creates some more yeasty flavors. It also makes it really fresh, but some may argue that the quality isn't quite as high as a traditional method. But it certainly isn't as labor intensive or as expensive. Transfer method basically is the traditional method made for alternate sized bottles. So basically the second fermentation happens in a bottle, and then they transfer the bottles into various sizes. So the little splits or big magnums. Ancestral method is for pet nat, which is a natural wine. And basically what makes this different is the base wine is created, it's then bottled with everything in there. The fermentation process is stopped by decreasing the temperature. So basically it becomes icy. Then they cap the bottle, and the second fermentation or it's actually still the first fermentation, but the second half of the first fermentation happens in the bottle, creating bubbles. Those bottles are amazing for several reasons. One, I don't know if you probably can't see, it's not clear enough, but the sediment is still in the bottle, which I find delicious. But it is super living and breathing. All the yeast is still in there, everything's still in there, and it's almost always topped with a bottle cap. And when you open it, it opens pretty aggressively. This is an Austrian one that I really like, but we can talk further about them later if that's something you're interested in. But that's something it's 100% natural. Absolutely nothing has been added to it. It's cool. Carbonation method is basically gas injection. It's canned wines. Basically, canned wines are injected with carbon dioxide, much the way you would make soda. It's an alcoholic soda, basically. Continuous method, also known as Russian method. You'll probably never see it unless you go to Russia. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a Russian method sparkling. They're very uncommon. So that's, without getting too technical, hopefully, that's how you make sparkling wine. One of the things that people note about sparkling wine is a level of sweetness. And champagnes and sparklings are all categorized by level of sweetness. So brut champagne means it's a level of sweetness in the wine. The sweetness comes from that step in the sparkling process called the dosage, when something was added, because as we said, the original base wine is bone dry. It's very acidic, actually. And in fact, it's made super acidic so that it is able to be dosed with a little bit of sweetness after and not become too sweet. And that's so that the level of bubble is just right, because if there's too much sugar, then the yeast eats too much, doesn't create the right carbon dioxide. So it's very important to have the right amount of sweetness. But basically think of that dosage as adding a little bit of sugar to your coffee to round out the flavor. One of the most fascinating things, though, is how little sugar it actually takes to make it taste sweet. And the levels of sweetness, if we go from driest, the absolute driest out there, it's called brut nature. That means it's completely bone dry, no sugar, nothing dosed added. That's like that pet nut I just showed you. It's like 91, 92 calories per glass, 5-ounce glass. The next level of dry, excuse me. So it's brut nature is the driest. Next one down is extra brut. That only has about a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar in it. Then is brut, which we consider dry. It's got 1/2 teaspoon of sugar in a glass. Next will be extra dry. So note, extra dry is sweeter than brut. That is 1/2 to 3/4 teaspoon of sugar. Then comes dry, which to my palate, a dry sparkling is very sweet. It's got about a teaspoon of added sugar. Demi-sec is sweeter, and then doux is very, very sweet. But demi-sec will be the sweetest you see on the shelf at your store, your liquor store. So let's talk about storing, opening, serving, and drinking sparkling. Sparkling wine should be stored upright to keep the cork dry and in place. Ideal storage is about 50 degrees, but the ideal serving temp is about 38 to 45 degrees, so cooler than you would serve a white wine. You ideally want to serve in a tulip glass, which is this, rather than a coupe. The coupe is kind of like this bowl shape. Think Great Gatsby. I don't know if you guys saw the Great Gatsby movie when I was walking around the coupes. That's how they used to serve sparkling. But they have learned that the bubbles kind of move too quickly in that. There's too much surface area. So the tulip is the ideal glass. I'm going to try and demonstrate opening a bottle for you. It's kind of hard at this angle, but I'm going to try and do that for you. So I'm going to open the champagne that we're going to be tasting today. The first thing to note is your A finger should always be on top, always, because it is under pressure. So you will see, we really never, once you get kind of the paper off, you never remove your thumb from the top. When you are undoing the cage, I still have a thumb on the top, because there are times when it is under pressure, or you're in the mountains or something and it shoots out. And I think one of us demonstrated that earlier. Then once you get the cage off, you want the bottle at about a 45-degree angle. I usually rest it against my thigh to get 45 degrees, but doing this in front of a camera is kind of hard. Then you want to give the cork about a 1/4 turn, and then it will just migrate itself. And basically, I am not letting it shoot out. I'm kind of gently turning it until it pops out. There's a little pop. Ideally, you want like a little, it's called the queen's fart or queen's toot. That's the ideal sound when you open up a bottle. If you pull it out, you're either going to get a volcano of sparkling wine, or you're going to get too much oxygen in the bottle, killing the bubbles. So that's how you open. So I've got most of mine open. If you guys want to open while I talk a little bit, and then we'll get to drinking as well, tasting for those of you who will be tasting with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of sparkling. A decent entry-level bottle of champagne goes for about $40, $35, $40, which isn't exactly like Taco Tuesday pricing, you know? It's not a bottle you would just feel comfortable opening every day, although I'm all about celebrating everything, celebrating the small things too. But fortunately, I have a lot of tips on finding great alternatives. The solution really is to look outside of the small region of Champagne, which is in northern Burgundy, France, for good, decently priced bubbles at a fraction of the cost. Save those bottles of champagne for your big celebrations. There's great sparkling outside of there as well. Not only from regions around the world, but there's 23 other sparkling wine regions in France alone. And many of them use this traditional method, the champagne method. So let's get to some of my recommendations and some sparkling wines that I think you should try. The wines that I'm recommending today are predominantly made in the traditional method, not all, because I wanted you to taste the difference. But they're more accessible in price, and in my opinion, excellent alternatives for evenings where you don't want to break the bank. You should be able to find each of these styles, while not necessarily exactly the brands that I have here that I'm going to show you, but you can find at least a style similar to it. As for the landscape, we're going to try a Prosecco or talk in depth about a Prosecco, a Cava, a Cremant de Loire, an American sparkler with a twist, not twist top, but a twist in the story, a Cap Classique, and we're going to taste a champagne. So the first, if you are one of the people that has a Prosecco, fantastic. If not, you'll learn along. This is the Prosecco I picked. Something important to note when you look at a Prosecco bottle, the DOC is the denomination. So that is a nice level Prosecco and Brut, which means it is on the drier side. Prosecco wines are Italy's most popular sparklers. Technically, Prosecco is a sparkling wine that originates from the Val di Abiadne region in Veneto, Italy. The wine is made from what was originally called Prosecco grapes, but they've changed names since people got confused. The grape varietal is now called Galera, and they're made with the Charmat sparkling method, which we talked about earlier. And that gives the wine about 3 atmospheres of pressure, which is more than beer. That means the bubbles last longer than beer, but not quite as long as something like a champagne, which is 5 or 6 atmospheres of pressure. Many of them, or most of them, are Brut, dry. However, due to the grape's fruity flavors of green apple and honeydew, melon, pear, and honeysuckle, it usually seems sweeter than it is. And additionally, sometimes there's some residual sugar. Because of that tank method, there is often some residual sugar left over. And it is refined sugar that's added, not necessarily must. And I talked about the DOC. DOCG is the next level of higher quality. That means that the Prosecco has come from a very little town called Conegliano, which is in this region as well. The smaller and more focused the region the grapes come from, the higher the quality. So anything from that Conegliano is considered a DOCG, which is a higher level and more expensive Prosecco. Some of them are fantastic. Proseccos are really food friendly, good with antipasto, anything salty, and they do very well with spicy Asian food. So for those of you who will be tasting along today, we're going to taste the Prosecco now. So first thing I do when I look at sparkling is I look at the quality of bubble. So are there a lot of bubbles? Are there a few bubbles? Are they big bubbles? Are they little bubbles? How quickly do they rise? So Prosecco is known to have slightly bigger bubbles. And they're rising fairly quickly, but not too quickly. And then it's like a heavy straw color. Next thing I do is I smell. I get my nose all the way in. So about 90% of what you taste comes from your olfactory senses. I smell some green apple and honeydew and lager, like beer lager. And that's kind of from the yeastiness. And then you taste. You get a lot of that yeastiness. It's dry, but very fruity. It's going to be sweeter than the other sparklings. Body is light to medium. There's some creamy notes at the end, but mostly it's not super complex. It's a pretty simple drink. but it's nice and crisp. The next we're going to go to is we're going to talk about a Cava. This is the Cava we've got right here, for those of you who are drinking along. Cava is Spain's gift to the world of delicious bubbles. The more you explore Cava, the more parallels you'll find with Champagne. Surprisingly, even though many are made in the similar quality level and style to Champagne, Cava is almost always considerably more affordable. I often talk about it as Champagne style at Prosecco prices. I don't know if you guys, that show in the 90s, like that $1 million, the guy was always on the yacht and he's like, you know, Champagne. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was very funny. And I always think about that when I talk about Cava. What makes Cava different is not only that it's from Spain, but it's also produced either by really strictly native grape varietals or a blend of traditional Spanish and French varietals. The most common varietal is a Macabeo, which is also known as Viura. It's a nice, ripe, exotic stone fruit flavored grape with chamomile notes. Parellera, which is also a white grape. Charello, which is lean and underripe. And then sometimes in the Reservas, they use Chardonnay and Pinot Noir as well, which are French in origin. Most Cavas. Go ahead.
Can I interrupt you before I forget? Someone wants to know if there's a correct way to pour it. So when you get to pouring, can you
Good question.
Explain that?
I will pour for you. So when you pour into the Tulip glass, you want to kind of hold the glass at an angle and then pour down the side of the glass. The reason you want to do this is, one, you don't want it to splash, and letting it enter gently allows the bubbles to be disturbed as little as possible. And generally you pour a 4 to 5 ounce glass to serve. Did that help? Yeah. Thank you. Most of the Cavas in the marketplace are of basic varietal. So they'll just say on them, brut and traditional. There are some that are different. There are Reserva that I'll show you in a minute. As a reminder, Champagne style sparklers like Cava undergo that process to make the bubbles in the bottle, that second fermentation in the bottle. And that second fermentation and sitting on the lees, which is those dead yeast, really adds a lot to a Cava. It adds some fresh dough notes, white chocolate, almond, marzipan. Those are notes that you'll get. But a young Cava, which is just a brut, typically is dominated by citrus and orchard fruits, quince, lime notes, sometimes Meyer lemon. But when they're aged a little bit longer, so originally they're 9 months for bruts, 15 months for Reserva. As they sit on those lees longer, they get that deeper, richer notes of that breadiness. And a Grand Reserva is actually 30 months on the lees aged, which is the same approximately that a vintage Champagne would be. A Grand Reserva Cava will probably cost $36. Whereas a vintage Champagne will start at $150. So usually Cavas are exceptional in terms of value for you. So let's go ahead and try that Cava if you guys are tasting. You'll look at it. The bubbles are a little bit livelier. I've had mine open a little bit longer, but they're a little bit livelier. It's a little bit lighter in color too. And as we smell, we get a lot more citrus. And I get minerality right away. So almost like rock salt, not salty, but like that smell of when you open rock salt, like or Himalayan salt. And you get some toastiness as well. Let's taste. Really flavorful. A lot of apple and pear, a lot of minerality, a lot of great acid, which makes it really crisp. It definitely doesn't taste as sweet as the Prosecco does. It's much lighter. if I were to make a cocktail with a sparkling, Cava would be always the one I choose. One, because you don't want to spend a fortune if you're mixing your sparkling with something. But two, it's a lot less sweet. So if you're putting it with like orange juice, which is already sweet, it'll cut some of that. Really nice and crisp. It's also good food wine. I really like that. I would really serve it with sushi or caviar, something that's got a lot of salt, or fried food. It would do really well with, like calamari. Good, it's good seafood, but it cuts through the fattiness. So that's really a Cava. Are there any other questions so far? I can't really see the chat, so if you have questions, just feel free to stop in and ask, or just to break in and ask. The next we're going to go to is a Crémant. Crémant is actually a group of sparkling wines made in the same technique as a champagne, but from outside a Champagne region in France and Luxembourg. It's a style of sparkling wine that'll satisfy both your desire for a really high quality bubbly, because it employs that champagne method, yet it is miles more affordable than champagne itself. And often on a wine list at a restaurant, you can find a really nice Easter egg here. I know that I've always planted some Easter eggs with Crémant, and I always want to talk to somebody when they select it, because I'm impressed by their taste. The Crémant regulations in France are only slightly less stringent than those of Champagne, which is super stringent. And quality is found in these wines throughout France. Although regional rules can vary, all Crémant wines must adhere to the requirements such as manual harvesting. It's all sparkling wine. Manual harvesting of grapes, whole bunch pressing with limited must extraction, which means there's a lot tossed away. And minimum of 9 months lees aging. The most popular ones are Crémant d'Alsace, which is often one of my Easter eggs. I have a bottle over here that I'll show you in a minute. A Crémant de Bourgogne, which Champagne is technically in the Burgundy region, but Crémant de Bourgogne is from outside of Champagne. I have my sous chef here helping hand me stuff. This is a Crémant d'Alsace, one of my absolute favorites, actually. Crémant de Lemieux, Crémant de Loire, and then there are also Crémant de Bordeaux, Jura, and Savoy, and Luxembourg. But the ones that are most common are really the first four that I mentioned. And I can go into detail on all of them or any of them if somebody is interested in learning more about them. But we're really going to focus on the Crémant de Loire today, because that is one that is really a great value and it's delicious. We actually kind of use it as our house celebratory on a regular celebration day, because it drinks really nicely, but it does not break the bank. Crémant de Loire is made in the Anjou, Saumur, Turin regions in the really lush part of Loire Valley. The predominant use of Chenin Blanc lends these wines to have really unique flavors of lemon and quince, honey, and chamomile. And although many grapes are allowed in the Crémant production here in Loire, Sauvignon Blanc is not. So I know if a lot of you are Sauvignon Blanc drinkers, Sancerre, which is in Loire, Loire is known for their fabulous Sauvignon Blanc, but it's illegal to use Sauvignon Blanc in a sparkling wine. Don't know why, but it is. If you love Sauvignon Blanc and you want a sparkling wine made of Sauvignon Blanc, seek out one from New Zealand. Or from Bordeaux. Crémant de Bordeaux is also Sauvignon Blanc, but in Loire, it's illegal. So anyway, this Crémant de Champcenny is 100% Chenin Blanc. It has when you look at it, it has a green tint to it. So that's one thing that Chenin Blanc is known for, is having kind of a green tint to the wine. It's a green grape. You also get some interesting notes when you smell. You get smokiness, and you get some creaminess, and you get some brie. And that is one of the things that makes Cremant de Loire so easy to identify is that brie note, which I think is delicious. Let's taste. My sous chef does not like the taste of brie in her Cremant, obviously. This is one of my absolute favorites. I love Granny Smith apples. And for me, I get like that juicy Granny Smith apple juice running down the face flavor. And I get a lot of smokiness. And in Loire, there's a lot of peat. So you get some of those peat notes. It's similar to what you would get in a Puy Fumé in Loire. That smokiness, that comes out really nicely in the Cremant. I love that. And the finish, there's a lot of smoke on the finish. And a lot of Anjou pear in the finish, which is very nice. It's super complex. You could take 10 sips and get 10 different flavor profiles. There's some hay on the finish too. I really love that. So that's a Cremant. Again, we're talking a third of the price of a bottle of champagne and a really delicious drink. So you don't need to break the bank. So let's take a step into the New World. If you love New World wines, then you really should look for sparklers from cooler coastal regions with a history of great quality. The secret to great sparkling wine starts with great grapes. It's pretty obvious. Traditionally, Champagne calls for Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier in some blended format. What you might not know is that these grapes and other sparkling wine grapes prefer cooler climates to produce really high acidity. So if you look around the world at different wine regions, you'll see a trend showing cooler climate areas that produce great sparkling wines. One that is actually pretty hot in the market right now is South African Cap Classique. This is the Graham Beck that I'm featuring today. Cap Classique it's very interesting. It's made in that traditional method as well. Like all of the ones we're drinking, except for that first Prosecco, are all going to be made in that champagne method. It's made both with Chenin Blanc or Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. And they're fantastic. Other great New World ones from the United States, yes, you can find great sparkling from California. But the cooler parts of Napa and Sonoma really produce the best. And Oregon is starting to produce some really nice ones as well. A lot in the Cremant d'Alsace style with Pinot Gris, which is delicious. Most of the sparklings from the US start at about $25, $30 a bottle. But what will really blow your mind is one we're going to talk about today. It's inexpensive yet completely delicious from New Mexico called Gruet, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But it blows your mind, and it's from New Mexico of all places. Next, Tasmania produces fabulous sparkling wine. The Jance is one of my favorites from Tasmania, island off of Australia. Really good sparkling wine. Also a cool climate. And then also, if you know me, I can wax on poetically about British sparklers. The English have something spectacular to talk about. They make incredible sparkling wine. This is one of my absolute favorites called Hattingly Classic Reserve. It's a Brut Reserve. It's actually originally the Perignon family that one of the, they called them a bastard son, but that's not an appropriate thing to say. A stepchild of someone that moved to England that started the program. But as the climate has changed, the climate in southern England is that which Champagne region was. And they're producing fantastic sparkling wine. But let's go back and talk a little bit in detail of the Graham Beck, which is the Cap Classique, because we're going to taste that next. As I said, South Africa is known really for amazing Chenin Blanc and Pinotage, among others. but they often have this gaminess to their wines, all South African wines. And this holds true in Cap Classiques as well. And that's one of the things I find so unusual and so cool about them. Graham Beck it's a larger producer, but it's consistently good. In my opinion, it doesn't quite have the complexity of the Cremant we just had, but it's a good drink, and it's fresh and crisp, but it has, again, that unique gaminess that South African wines have. So if we pick it up and look at it, and this one is a little bit more Pinot Noir heavy in this particular version. So it has a hint of pink to the wine. The next three, actually, well, the next two we're going to have are pretty Pinot Noir driven. It's got really good bubble character, very tight, small, fast, creamy bubbles. And then the notes are going to be different. You get more like white cherry and ginger, some creaminess, always creaminess, but a different, it's not brie creamy, it's more like clotted cream creamy, and some tropical fruit. Let's taste it. So the first thing I get is mango and passion fruit. Really tropical. And some lycheeness. Some lychee. But for me, the gaminess is the thing that always stands out. Blindly, I could identify this just from the nose. It smells like going on a safari to me. And you get that aftertaste of like a root vegetable or something with more iron in it that I find very interesting. The next one we're going to talk about is the Gruet. So we have a Gruet Blanc de Noir from New Mexico. And this is unique for a couple different things. First, I know what you're thinking, that I'm completely crazy. Well, even though that may be the case, this Champagne Method sparkler from New Mexico it's stunning. Gilbert Gruet left his family vineyard in Champagne in 1983 and moved just south of Albuquerque, which had actually been planted in the 1600s with grapevines. But he realized that the climate was perfect and the terroir conditions were perfect for Champagne style sparklings. And he actually had his family ship him vines. So he planted vines and they've been producing ever since. Gruet sparklers are often some somm favorites, both because of value and quality. This bottle in particular, the Blanc de Noir, is special because it means white made of reds. So that means that this sparkling wine is made exclusively of Pinot Noir grapes. Honestly, I like all the wines in Gruet's lineup, but this is my absolute favorite. It's softer, it's bolder, it's velvety, it's very fruit forward, but it's still crisp. And in my opinion, it can stand up to a bottle easy 3-4 times the price point. If you have them poured, you'll see there's a creamy line on the top. This is called a mousse. The mousse means that it's a very high quality sparkler. That means the bubbles are really small. They're going to move quickly and they'll kind of tickle your lip as you taste. It's also a little bit pinker in color because I said it's 100% Pinot Noir. It's done without any skin contact, so there's no tannins to it at all. However, Pinot Noir grapes tend to be fruitier. And it's really, it's very velvety on your tongue. There's a lot of like berry notes, specifically raspberry. I get a lot of raspberry. It's kind of some baked pear that gives you kind of the brioche-ness with fruit. It's nice and toasty, also very complex. And then let's talk about champagne. We spent so much time talking about why we don't need to drink champagne and why things are good because they're not quite champagne. But at the end of the day, we're comparing everything to champagne for a reason. There's really nothing as fantastic as a wonderful bottle of champagne. Wine's emotional. We create emotional connections and bonds with wine. You can spot that yellow orange iconic label or box of Clicquot a mile away and know exactly what it is. And you probably have a memory of a father or grandfather, or for me, grandmother, that loved to only drink Clicquot. It is something that is just iconic. And how many rap odes have been penned for Cristal? How about Dom? We don't even need to address him by his full name. These are because they're champagne houses. They have storied histories, one that I've had to study in great depth, which I am happy to have done. I love them. But they're magnificent wines that have, were originally a mistake. And the first international brand, really, ever, that was helmed by a woman, Madame Clicquot, was a champagne brand. It's what legends and celebrations and weddings and anniversaries and Valentines are made of. So if it's so fantastic and there's so many out there, how do we choose a good one? We talked originally about good entry-level champagne will cost you about $35 to $40. This will be a non-vintage bottle, sometimes a second label from a good brand or a very good, well-known brand. But a grower champagne, which means that the champagne vines and grapes are grown on the same property by the same people that are producing the end product, can be a lot more expensive. And vintage champagnes will start at minimum $150. Almost all champagne, unless it has a specific vintage written on it, is non-vintage. So this is Paul Roche is one of my favorite champagne producers. This is a vintage Paul Roche. So you'll see that specifically written on the box or bottle. And they can go, depends on the vintage. They can go for, like I said, they begin at $150. So what's the difference? All champagne is a blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier in some quantity, as I said, unless it's called a Blanc de Blanc, which means it's 100% Chardonnay, or a Blanc de Noir, like we tasted in the Gruet, which was a non-champagne, which is 100% Pinot Noir. But everything else is a blend of those three grapes. To make non-vintage champagne, which is normal champagne, typically the current year's harvest, in other words, the current year's vintage, forms the base of the blend. Finished wines from previous years, called the vin de réserve, are blended in at approximately 10 to 50% of the total volume in order to achieve a consistent flavor, complexity, body, and acidity for the desired house style. A tiny proportion of champagnes are made from a single vintage, and that is only when it is deemed that is an exceptional vintage. And that's pretty unusual. The champagne I picked today is a tête de cuvée, which it's an entry-level champagne. However, tête de cuvée means that it is the top growth of the property, which is quite nice. This champagne is unique because it is a house established in 1811 by Casanova, but it has been purchased by other champagne houses throughout the year. However, someone from the family lineage has always been involved from the Casanova family. In 1983, Moët Chandon sold them again. And so currently they are family run, but they have in the past been run by larger brands, which makes them a little bit more affordable. So again, there's the mousse line around, which looks really good. Bubbles are racing at a very nice clip. This one is about 60% Pinot Noir and about 30% Pinot Meunier. I can see that from the color. It could be a little bit more Chardonnay than Meunier, but we'll see when we taste it. It's got a moderate mousse. It's not a super crazy mousse, but a moderate mousse. So feel the bubbles on your tongue, feel creamy. You'll get probably some lemon zest notes. But one thing that's very unique in champagne is you'll get a lot of minerality. You'll get like graphite notes. The way when you when you sharpen a pencil, a lead pencil, that smell of the sharpenings, that's that graphite note. Really nice and smooth, lots of brioche-ness. You get some nice marzipan notes. It's not, I mean, you could sit and just drink. It doesn't need to be with food. You can just sit with your loved one and enjoy. So that's really the champagne. So I've talked about the most popular styles of sparkling, but honestly, the story's just begun. I mean, I could talk for hours, but I don't want to bore you at the same time with too many words. So I want to open it up the floor to any questions, and then we can go from there. It might send us off in some directions. So if anybody has anything, feel free to jump in. And I think someone technical is going to unmute the crowd. Too much.
Hi, I had a quick question.
Yes.
When you mentioned the differences between vintage and non-vintage, it's you know, my recollection is that things like Krug, for example, the non-vintage is superior to some of the vintage. Is that generally true? Is that not true? Or?
It is very unusual when that is the case. A vintage, so usually a champagne house will only put out a vintage when it's exceptional. It's pretty rare to put out so for example, I'm going to use Paul Roche as an example because it's one of my favorites. They put out a vintage probably every 4 or 5 years. Most of the time, everything is non-vintage. Non-vintage is consistent. It is exactly what you expect of it, because they're adding in older vintages, so it keeps that consistency throughout the years. On a spectacular vintage, it can be mind-blowing, really. I mean, that I showed you that 2009. I had that for my wedding. I had it at a tasting several years ago, and I was blown away. I mean, I was moved to tears by it, and it was memorable. And I wanted to always remember that flavor. So that's why I purchased it. A good vintage champagne should have that impact on you. It should move you. I mean, some vintage bottles cost $500, so it should move you a lot.
Other than your wallet.
Exactly. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes.
Good.
And what's your sense of rosés?
So I'm a lover of rosés. I specifically didn't go into them here because it's very complicated. Rosé sparklers are not made in the same way that rosé wine, still wine, is made. Rosé sparklers are done basically as I said before, the still wines are fermented separately. They're vinified separately and then blended. That's how a sparkling rosé is done as well. So a Pinot Noir and a Chardonnay and a Pinot Meunier will all be vinified separately and then blended. That's the art of the winemaking, is the blending process. And then the second fermentation will happen. I love rosé. I absolutely love it. However, there is more variance when it comes to a sparkling rosé. Not all of rosé sparkling ages well on the lees. Pinot Noir, one of the things that's so beautiful about Pinot Noir is it's so gentle and soft and subtle, and you want to baby it. And then sitting it on lees for 5 years kind of takes a lot of that away, in my opinion. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure.
You want to ask a question?
Go ahead.
Can you talk about Prosecco?
Absolutely. What would you like to know more about Prosecco?
Well, you didn't include it in anything, and it's probably what most people buy. So
it was the first one that we talked about, but I'm happy to go through it again with you, no problem whatsoever. I'm not sure if you weren't able to hear some of the problem, some because we had the technical issue. But
Yeah, maybe I didn't.
the Prosecco is the one that's made in the tank method. This is the Prosecco that we were tasting. And Prosecco, what makes it a little bit, it's very common in the marketplace in the United States. It's probably the most common sold sparkling wine. Other than right now, actually, unfortunately, new aged canned wines are taking over the marketplace. However, Prosecco is very, very popular. What makes it interesting is that not only is it a tank method, so that the second fermentation happens in the tank. However, the difference is that there are about 6 6 Prosecco houses in the region. Those 6 Prosecco houses in their giant tanks produce about 40 labels worth of Prosecco. They will all sit next to one another on the shelf in your supermarket or liquor store. They're all the exact same Prosecco at 10 different prices or 6 different prices, but they're all literally pulled from the same tank with a different label put on top. So that's one of the things about Prosecco that I find challenging. And they tend to be more expensive than entry-level cavas. So if somebody comes and talks to me about sparkling and has some questions about them and wants, they don't want to spend a whole lot, they want to spend under $15, I will always lead them to a cava because you get so much more for your money. You get a handmade product that is the fermentation process has been happened in the bottle. And there's no refined sugar added to it either. Hopefully that answered your question. If you have any further questions.
Thank you.
No.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Tina, this is Jerry and Janice Masson, who you delivered some nice wine to us today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So the question is, once the bottle has been opened, you don't finish the bottle. Is there a way to prevent it from deteriorating so fast?
So that's a very good question. And I only have one here, but there's a couple different styles. Yeah, on the table. I set up table. Yeah, so there is such thing as a sparkling stopper or champagne stopper. And that does a very good job of maintaining the bubbles for 3 to 5 days, really. Although they don't generally last that long around my house. However,
They won't hear you.
Overnight,
I opened 6 bottles to taste with you guys today, so they're all going to. I don't have. I sold all the ones that I showed you guys, so I don't have one here at this table, but I have another style as well. This one is one that I'm going to use. Basically, it goes in the bottle and it hooks, and it creates a suction, and basically it doesn't allow the air to go in. The normal silicone corks that I often talk about, the vacuum where you put the silicone cork in and you pump out the air, those are not good for sparkling because as you're pumping out the air, you're pumping out the bubbles. Right. And that bubbles is what makes sparkling wine spectacular. Don't worry about it. And regular, like if you just put a cork back in, it's going to pop out because it's under pressure. So the only really way to save your sparkling is with a champagne or sparkling stopper.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Jan.
Go ahead.
I have a history. I'm a history buff, and I have a history question. Have we lost some wines because of the wars that killed off the people who were running them and that type of stuff that we may never be able to?
I mean, we've lost a lot of wines for a lot of different reasons. But if you're talking like World War I and World War II, if you like history, you need to read the Madame Clicquot book. It is a fascinating book and a fascinating story, and it's you have to be a history buff to really enjoy, or into wine to really enjoy it, because it's very dense. And I'm sure we know a library that carries it. If not, you guys are going too quickly. But it's a spectacular book about the history, not only of the Clicquot brand, but also what happened throughout all the wars and what a lot of houses did in order to save their wines. A lot was lost. End of the day,
Unbelievable.
majority was lost. In a lot of places during famine, they ripped out the vineyards to plant potatoes and to plant other things to feed people. However, what was done in order to preserve what they could is the fascinating part of the story, in my opinion. They built fake walls and fake caverns and tunnels and I mean, everything in order to protect a lot of the wines pouring. But the Germans, you know, went through France and either drank a lot of the wine or poured it out on the streets. War is war, you know. A lot of stuff happens. There's a lot of history. One of the places I'm doing a lot of personal research on right now is Moldova. Moldova has got some incredibly fascinating wines. They also have the longest network of caverns and caves in the world. There's actually more roads underground than above ground in the country of Moldova. And they're all geared towards cellars, wine cellars, and private wine cellars. But they spent, during World War II, they hid Jews in the casks as the Russians went through. And it's fascinating. And now they have a whole nother history with Putin, which has been fascinating, and why, you know, Putin basically had his 50th birthday there, said, I love your wine. I want you only to export to Russia. We'll buy everything we promise, but you're only allowed to export to us, not to the US and not to the EU. And they said, thank you, but no thank you. And then Russia basically has not, they've put up all sorts of barricades and all. It's been an issue for them, obviously. But there's a lot of history that has evolved around wine. That's one of the things for me as someone who studied anthropology and sociology. One of the things I love about wine, because it is history, it's geography, it's anthropology, it's sociology, it's all of those things.
Tina, we have a few, someone wanted you to address Vino Verde as a wine, and there are a couple of suggestions for books, and one's called Wine and War, and the other is called The Winemaker's Wife. And then somebody wants you to recommend a rosé and a cava.
Absolutely,
So,
thank you. So
yeah.
Vino Verde is not a sparkling wine. So I know if you're a Vino Verde lover and you drink it and you're like, oh, it's bubbling. It's not a sparkling wine. It's actually a highly acidic wine that tricks your palate into thinking it's sparkling. So what I say is it dances on your tongue. Vino Verde is a great blend, either from Spain or from Portugal. If you add an H before the O, it's from Portugal. And it is often sweet. It's got some residual sugar on it, generally 5.5%, 6% alcohol. But it's got so much acid on it that it dances on your tongue and prickles your tongue, and it makes people often think that it's sparkling. Wine and War is a great book. Winemaker's Wife is actually, Wine and War is also a great documentary. But I know we want to talk only about books, so sorry. But Winemaker's Wife, I think it's fiction. Not that I don't absolutely love fiction, but I think it's taken quite a few liberties. So it's a great read to enjoy yourself, but it's probably not one that you want to stake your historical learnings on. Hopefully that makes sense.
I'll remember that. Thank you.
In terms of Cava and Rosé, I think actually Bohigas, this is a Reserva Cava. This is really good. That is one I recommend. I've got others as well. Faustino makes a great Cava as well, but it has got the most pretentious looking bottle in the world. As long as you can get over, don't judge a book by its cover. I'm going to bring everything back to books here. Don't judge a book by its cover. It's super pretentious labeling, but it's a fantastic Cava. In terms of rosé, I'm going to assume you're asking me about a rosé sparkling. I am going to, my favorite is called Billicart Salmon. Hold on one second. See the table? The table with the seven table? It's kind of funky looking bottle. Billicart Salmon. Actually, I lied. I have it here. I was prepared for this question. So I'm going to cover the price label. It's very expensive, but this is my absolute favorite rosé, sparkling rosé. It's called Billicard Salmon. I love it. Laurent Perrier also makes a fantastic sparkling rosé, as well as a fantastic extra brut, which is really delicious. I try to anticipate as many questions as possible. I'm sitting at a table with like 30 bottles here to try to anticipate questions, but those are my two favorite.
So let's see.
My pleasure. I'm going to take a sip while we talk. Hopefully that's okay.
Let me take this second and I'll tell you a cute little story. My parents, for their 50th anniversary, had been to every state in the United States, including Alaska, a number of times. And so they had not been to Hawaii because my father had to drive. He had to drive everywhere. So the family, my peers, my brothers and sisters, we sent them to Hawaii for their 50th anniversary. So they arrived at their hotel and the tour company had given them a beautiful bouquet of birds of paradise and then the bottle of champagne there. Now, my parents grew up in the 20s and 30s in the Depression, had no money, never drank in their lives. So they thought this was wonderful. They opened the bottle of champagne the first night they were there in Hawaii, then traveled over the course of the week to the 5 different islands, took the bottle with them and had one drink each night with them, not knowing any different, and loved it the whole week long, didn't know any different.
You know, it's still going to taste good.
No bubbles.
Yeah.
No bubbles, but they didn't know any
bubbles.
different.
That's cute. That's so cute.
That's a great story.
Wow. By the way, everybody, this is being recorded. So if you need to brush up on it or go back to something that you might have missed, aside from when we muted you, Tina, please feel free. ECAT records this and we will have it on our website as soon as it's recorded. So you can, if you want to go and look at another wine that Tina's holding up for 1 minute and you don't have a picture of it.
I know, I'm sorry. I have so much to say and I don't want to.
Can I tell everybody where they can find you on Fridays?
Sure. I'm going to I'll type in the message my email address. Anybody can feel free to reach out to me via email. But this is a little quiet secret, but I actually work as an in-house somm for 2 days a week at the Whole Foods in Dedham Legacy Place. I actually got so sad doing private work all the time that I didn't see people that I felt the need to be with people all the time. And so I'm there Friday mornings and Sundays at the Whole Foods at Dedham. So if you want to come chat with me, you're welcome to come chat with me there.
One of the times I went to chat with Tina, another person who had taken our previous wine tasting was there buying a case of a wine that she recommended. So it's been, you know, it's a wonderful way to get to see the wines with Tina, and she can show you everything that Whole Foods carries.
Yeah.
So
I put my email address into
the chat.
I think I did it privately by mistake, so I will do it to everyone. But if anybody has any questions at all about anything wine, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be wine related, but I'm probably best served with wine related questions. Please feel free to reach out. And I will get back to you quickly. I will note that if you come seek me next week, I will not be there. I'm taking a vacation, so don't come Sunday on because you'll get a bad surprise. I will not be there. I am taking a very much needed vacation with my family.
That's great. You deserve it.
Enjoy it.
Be safe.
Thank you. Only do things safely.
So are there any late questions for Tina? We're going to close up in about 4 or 5 minutes. So any questions that we can take now?
Give me a stumper.
Oh God, if only I knew enough to give you a stumper. All right, I have a question. When
can't
was
think of anyone.
champagne, how long has champagne been on the, Here's one. Would you ever buy Dom Perignon?
So that's a very good question. I will certainly drink Dom Perignon. I enjoy it very much. First off, I'm never going to turn away a glass of champagne. Let's start with that. I absolutely love champagne. If you hand me your wallet and say, Tina, go buy a fantastic bottle of champagne, it's probably not going to be Dom Perignon for a couple of reasons. One, it is known specifically because of its great heritage and brand. It has gained that reputation because it's of great quality. However, I am one that likes to seek out the lesser known, and I am more about quality than I am about marketing, which is very funny because my last life was in marketing. But anyway, for me, it is about a fantastic bottle. And while I enjoy drinking Dom, that's not where my wallet share will be spent. As I said, Paul Roche is one of my favorite. Laurent Perrier. There's some fantastic grower champagnes. Pierre Peters. There's some great champagnes out there. Cristal. You would never catch me buying Cristal unless a client asks me specifically to buy it for them.
And somebody asked, what is the rarest champagne? What is the most rare champagne you know of?
So rare brand or
a kind that is so difficult to get or so special or amazing?
So that's a good question. So I think really the Winston Churchill Paul Roche is a specific there's three vintages of the Winston Churchill Paul Roche. It is a bottle I have been dying to even just lay my eyes on my whole life. And I've been to quite a few private champagne tastings in New York where, everybody beats their chest and brings their most expensive bottle out of the cellar and they want to show off with it. And I usually bring like a British sparkler and everybody wants to drink my wine, but that's fine. But I have always been dying to lay my eyes on a Winston Churchill Paul Roche, and I have yet to do that. And I've sought it out. So that's going to be my answer. That's the rarest that I can think of at the top of my head.
Excellent. Well,
so now if somebody sees one, you better take a picture for me.
Oh, I'm sure we will run into one soon. Anybody else? We have 1 minute left.
One last quick one. Tina, what's the average life of a bottle of sparkling wine before it goes bad?
So, I mean, you can get a Thomas Jefferson right now on auction at Sotheby's for, I think, $650,000. So you're welcome to buy that and try and see if that's still good. That's not where I'm going to spend my money, but it's out there. And if a client wants me to buy it for them, then we'll figure that out. But so it's a good question. I mean, wine, as I always say, wine is living inside the bottle. So when you buy a rare bottle of wine on auction or at a store and you're spending, the top of your budget, whatever bottle that is, that's the special bottle, right? There's no way of knowing if that bottle is perfect on the inside, because even if it has provenance, which means that what hands it has come from since it left the winemaker's hands, even if it has perfect provenance, the temperature on the ship across the ocean could have gone up, 7 degrees and causing something, or there could be mold in the cork. Almost all cork, 95% of cork comes from the same forest in Portugal. They've had some issues. Granted, only about 3% of all wines in the world that are corked have cork taint issues. But, you could get one of those 3%. You honestly never know. So certain wines age very well. Certain wines aren't intended to age. Even wines that age incredibly well, you can't ever guarantee.
I have one last question.
Please.
What is your opinion on Bollinger, La Grande Anne in particular?
So it's a nice bottle. And my husband is particularly in love with Bollinger. Yeah, and especially now the 007 is very exciting. And there's a Grand 007 as well. It's great marketing. Bollinger I like, and Bollinger is very popular in Scandinavia. And many of you know that I'm Scandinavian. So Bollinger is everywhere there. It drinks very nicely. But again, everyone happens to have or usually has an affinity to a particular style that they like. Most of the big houses have their own house style. That house style is either your favorite or it's not. I have certain house styles that I can sniff out a mile away, and I love them. And if I have the opportunity to go buy a nice bottle for myself, I'm always going to go that way. But at the same time, there's always a bottle of Bollinger in my wine fridge. In fact, there's more than one currently.
Someone wanted to know if there was, we're getting deluged with questions. Can you tell if there's a problem with cork by looking at it? What are the signs? What?
You cannot.
No, you cannot. Okay.
I will actually tell you a story, which hurts my heart a little bit, but I'm all about free sharing. So I have a wine of the month club that I deliver wines to certain people or select wines for certain people. Last month, I featured Bordeaux, and I delivered a very nice Bordeaux set of Bordeaux's to one of my clients, and one of the bottles was corked. Now I bought a case of this Bordeaux, and I had a bottle of it myself. Great. They got a corked bottle. Super embarrassing.
Corked?
No way of knowing. So basically, it's corked when if either there was mold on that particular cork, or there was some bacteria in the bottle, or there was a pinprick hole in the glass, or a little bit of oxygen got in between the cork and the glass. Any of one of those things can cause cork taint, which is bacterial, basically. It makes the wine taste like wet dog, wet cardboard, flooded basement. Those are all terms that you would use. It is, or it tastes like the wine tastes like cork. There's something wrong. There's no way of telling from the outside other than the cork is a mess. You can guess. But there's, again, no way of knowing, especially when it's got this seal over top. No way of knowing. It happens. But it's less than 3% of all wines in the world. So.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And Tina, thank you so much for hosting this with us. And this, I think, is your third wine tasting for us. And we're looking forward to more. Basically, whenever I wander into Whole Foods to see Tina, we come up with another idea. So please feel free to send us your ideas. And again, thank you for your time. Thanks to everyone for coming, and stay tuned. We have other master classes coming down the pike.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for everyone for spending your evening with me. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Tina. It was wonderful.
Bye.
I know.
Bye.
Bye.